Hello, everyone. My name is Purva Rajkotia, and I want to welcome everyone to this webinar on user research for ideating inclusive products and services. We have with us Anmol Anubhai as well as Brooke Baldwin, who will be presenting about the main topic. What I wanted to share with you are a few slides about IEEE SA and what SA activities are. The idea behind this presentation is basically to educate the mass about the things and the opportunities that IEEE SA can provide to the industry. With that being said, just wanted to give you a quick update on what IEEE SA basically is. SA is the IEEE Standards Association. The goal for the IEEE SA is to develop market-relevant open standards and solutions. And the way the group is going to do that is by advancing global technologies and technology platforms. Also, the idea behind it is to promote innovation, to contribute to a sustainable future, as well as to protect the public safety, health, and well-being. Now, just a little bit insights into the IEEE SA deliverables. So till now, IEEE has delivered more than 1,500 plus standards and projects with more than 34,000 global participants. We have around 340 plus corporate members, around 7,500 plus individual members, and 180 global agreements with different SDOs and different organizations. Now, again, this particular slide just talks about like, why do we need standardization? The question could always be like, okay, IEEE SA, which is the Standards Association, works on the development of standards, but what is the value add? So the idea behind the standards, I think many of us are aware, it's to influence the competition. The standards does allow the different market entrants to enter into the market by setting by leveling the playing field. Also, it innovates. It provides you an innovation in terms of the technological advancement. Also, having a standardized solution also fine-tunes your performance and improves efficiency. It also gives the market the confidence in buying a product, because once you have a product that is based on standards, you know that there are going to be multiple vendors, there are going to be multiple solutions out in the market. So as far as the consumer is concerned, he will have a more confidence in a product that's standardized compared to a solution that's proprietary. It also facilitates growth and facilitates trade, because again, the standards, they are not confined to any particular region. The standards are going to be adopted globally. And once you start seeing a global phenomenon behind standards, naturally your trade as well as your economic growth is facilitated because of standards activities. And just to give you an example, like it's said that the 4G activities, which was the standardized activities, it has contributed close to $20 billion just to the US economy. Just having the standardized 4G solutions is $20 billion. And now the people have started talking about the 5G based solutions, which are going to contribute close to $100 billion just to the US economy in terms of inhibiting new applications, new services, and new market adoption. So that just goes on to provide the strength behind the standards and how it helps in the economic growth. And also it provides a sustainable solution, because when you start talking about the solutions, the solutions that are developed by standards, they are making the technology safer. They are also making it interoperable, and also when the sustainability of a solution is not just by having a green label on it, because what we start doing is when you start having multiple vendors and they start developing a solutions, you are going to have a solution which is going to be much longer lasting than a proprietary solution from a single vendor, and then you basically have to throw away that entire solution, the solution that was proprietary. So from that perspective, also standardization helps in the sustainability goal. Now, there are different portfolios of products and services that comes from IEEE SA. There is Industry Connections Program, which is basically an incubator program. The idea behind it's very much similar to the Y Combinator, if people are aware of it. The idea behind this is IEEE is going to contribute to bring any new ideas that the industry might have, and into a viable product, or into a standards that is going to be benefiting the humanity, because that's one of the target IEEE SA works with, that we want to develop the technology that is going to benefit the humanity. And that is what we are going with. So the Industry Connections Program is again one of the platforms or the channels via which we incubate new programs. There are also the other programs like standardizations, membership, conformity assessment, registries, alliance management, and open source. These are the different products and services IEEE SA offers to the industry. Now, I'm just going to focus a little bit more on the Industry Connections Program, because this whole the webinar is actually part of the Industry Connections Program that is led by Anmol Anubhai. So I just wanted to give a little bit of understanding as to what this IC program is. So it's more like a pre-standardization activities. Right now, we have more than 60 programs. As I mentioned earlier, this is an incubator program for new standards and products. You can have like a customizable menu of resources. And again, this is something that is very efficient and economical in terms of development of new activities. Again, one of the things about the Industry Connections Program is that it gives the freedom to the industry to develop develop the new ideas without the constraints or without the rules and regulations that normally comes with the traditional standards organizations. So this is basically a true incubator program in which the industry has more flexibility in terms of developing solutions and developing products. These are just some of the practices within IEEE SA that are addressing different technologies. So we have health and life science, mobility, energy, connections and connectivity and telecommunications. And this is the practice under which this particular webinar is being hosted. And then you have foundational technology and new frontiers. Now again, I basically lead the connectivity and telecom practice, and within the practice, as mentioned, there are like many different programs. There's one program on rural connectivity. Then there is a user-centered approach to designing a user interface for rural communities, and this is the program that's led by Anmol. And then there is a transdisciplinary framework for 5G, feature networks, applications, and services. There is one on Open RAN, there is one on cybersecurity, and there are two other programs that have been approved. This is going to be on 6G solutions and the one on sustainable solution for connectivity and telecom networks. And with this, I'll basically give an open invitation for everybody to join with us. This is our website, our Twitter account, and our phone number. And with this, I hand over the stage over to Anmol, and she can continue. Thanks, Anmol.
Thanks, Purva. Thanks everyone for also taking out time to join our webinar. So I'm just going to begin screen sharing. Give me a minute here. Okay. So thanks again for taking out time to join our IEEE Next Billion Users webinar. This one is going to be on user research for ideating inclusive products and services. Our amazing speaker for today is Brooke Baldwin. She's a principal researcher at AWS, and we will also be learning a little bit more about Brooke in a bit. But before that, just a few housekeeping items. So please ensure that you stay muted. Today's presentation is a one-way broadcast. If you're experiencing any technical issues, please let us know. You can use the messaging feature to reach out, let us know, and we'll just get to it. We'll make sure we troubleshoot in little to no time. Also, if you have questions, we do have a specific, like a dedicated Q&A segment right after Brooke completes her presentation. So we will be taking questions. So make sure you leave all your questions using the Q&A chat feature below that you can see. We will get to them. So we will not be taking any questions while Brooke is presenting, but we have a dedicated segment for that as soon as she completes presenting. Now, a quick little recap. I know that a lot of you already know me. So hello to everyone who already knows me, but to those who are new to NBU and to myself, my name is Anmol. I am the chair of this particular group, focused on designing user-centered solution for our next billion users, for our rural communities, sensitive populations. This program, is people first and not tech first. I myself am a human-centered design researcher. I've had the good fortune of being in the UX space, in the user research domain for 9 years now. I'm currently a senior user researcher, a user research lead for the Amazon Web Services EC2 team, Elastic Cloud. Used to be on AIML before. I've also worked for Uber Eats and Google AI UX. A little bit more about this particular group. So the next billion users group, like I mentioned, our goal is to really initiate this whole process of shaping solutions by first getting to know these groups. By that, what I mean is conducting qualitative, quantitative research in field, understanding what are their explicit, implicit needs, pain points, so that we can truly cater meaningful solutions for those needs instead of, jumping to solutions or getting really excited about these buzzwords and technologies, right? Like AI, ML, IoT, you name it. There's so many. And I mean, I understand it is quite easy to get excited by these buzzwords and terms, but we want to make sure that we stay rooted in the reality. We understand what are the real needs and pain points and truly cater to their needs to actually make our users a part of the product development process. So one thing that we have started is to host monthly webinars and discussions where we invite HCI experts like Brooke here, and also students, enthusiasts. We welcome everyone, who is even say curious about human-computer interaction, about user research processes. You don't have to be an expert to be a part of this community. We just had our first kickoff meeting and we welcome all of you. So if you're interested in joining our community and being a part of it, send me a message. I'll add my contact info in the chat so you can reach out to me at any point. And again, our main goal, like how Purva mentioned, is to shape a proposal for standards focused on user research processes. So that's everything about myself and this community. Not going to spend too much time on that. Once again, I really wanted to actually take out a few minutes to welcome and thank our amazing expert speaker for this afternoon, evening, Brooke Baldwin. So a little bit about Brooke. She's a user experience researcher in her day job. Her research career has focused on using qualitative methods to understand people and the context of their lives, often in connection with how they use technology. She currently lives in New York with her cat Pudge. Brooke is also an avid napper, partial to burritos and donuts. I love donuts too, so yeah, plus 100 to that, and a big fan of speculative fiction. In this webinar, Brooke will share her 20 plus years as a user experience researcher, conducting studies in countries like Brazil, India, Indonesia, Turkey, Russia, and more. She'll also share how she has worked in collaboration with engineers and what that impact has meant. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Brooke. But once again, we are all very grateful that you took out time to share your experience with us. Welcome, Brooke.
Thank you, Anmal. I appreciate that. Thank you, Purva, and thank you to everyone at IEEE for inviting me to have this conversation with you all. Give me just a second to get my slides shared and up and running, and then we'll start. Be careful. Sometimes I'm terrible at this, so we're going to see how I do. Okay, let me put this in presentation mode so it looks fancy. Okay, thumbs up. Can we see what I've got here sharing with everyone? Okay, Purva and Anmal, if you want to go off camera, that's fine. You're welcome to stay with me. Either way is good. And just so for the folks who are watching, I can't see any of the comments that you're making now, but as I'm talking, go ahead and add questions if they come up. And when we get to the Q&A, we'll go through and we'll try to get to everything. So hi, I'm Brooke Baldwin. I'm a user experience researcher, like Anmal said, 24 years of experience. And I've learned how to do things wrong a lot of times. And over those years, figured out how to hopefully do things right a little bit. So today I'm going to talk to you about that. But I want to be really crisp about, who this talk is intended for. So this is really meant for people who maybe don't have a ton of experience with user experience research, maybe know a little bit about it, but don't know what do those weird researchers do. So that's where I'm kind of anchoring the conversation. That said, if you do have experience with user experience research, gosh, that's a mouthful, either as a researcher or someone who's worked with researchers, stick around, ask questions. We can have some interesting conversation, hopefully. And I'm really glad that you're all here. Thank you for taking time out of your day. I know everybody's really pretty busy. Okay, here we go. I'm clicking on the wrong things already. Okay, so this is a question I like to ask, particularly engineers who I'm working with, maybe for the first time, or maybe I know that they're earlier in their career, and I like to ask them, hey, have you ever met someone who's used a product that you built? And the overwhelming majority of the time, the answer I get is like, no, like you can do that. Or I watched a usability lab study one time, but often there's a big gap between engineers who are building things and then the people who are using them. And as a researcher, I'm hoping to kind of bridge that gap for the teams that I work on. So if you haven't ever met someone that has used your product or the service that you worked on, or if you have, do you understand what the context is in how they use your product? Is there a difference between how they're using it and like what you meant when you were actually building it? And you see that there's maybe some distortion or workarounds that they have. These are important, kind of interesting questions that I get to work on. Have you ever had a chance to understand, like, are they from a different culture than yours? And so maybe they have different ways of thinking about things. Maybe they're using your service in a language that it wasn't sort of normally built for, but they have a language toggle maybe on their operating system level or something like that. And have you been able to see how that actually influences how they use the product? It's really interesting if you create a product and it's for right to left or left to right characters, but then you see someone who's using it who's got right to left characters. You think, oh God, like the whole interface looks so weird and is hard to use. Have you ever been able to put understanding the needs of your users at the center of your development process? Like, how did you do that? Because this is kind of what I'm trying to do, and Anmol, as a fellow researcher, like we're trying to do as part of the process. Okay, so that's just a little basic piece of that. On our agenda today, we're going to talk about, just what is user experience research? Like, can we define it? Why is it a differentiator? Like, why do people talk about it? Why do people care? Like, is it really that big of a deal? What do we researchers do? Like, literally, like, what are the weird things we're doing all day? Don't we just talk to people? Is that it? There's a little bit more that goes into it. We're going to talk about the different methods that we use for research a little bit. We're not going to go super deep in this, but I do want to expose you to some of the breadth of methodological approaches. And explain some of them a little bit so you can kind of see, like, oh, wow, there's lots of different ways we can attack understanding a context or a problem. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of doing research and bringing along some engineers and the impact that had on the product and the impact it actually had on the engineers. To prepare for this talk, I actually went back and talked to some of my former colleagues to say, like, hey, when we started working together, you'd never worked with a researcher. And then, like, we went in field to Mexico and to Brazil and to Indonesia. Like, what was your takeaway? How did it change you? And if so, how? So talk a little bit about that. And yes, I'm one of the lucky, privileged researchers in the world who gets to do very interesting research in lots of interesting places. So we are looking at photos of, I think, Jakarta, Singapore, Sao Paulo, Puebla, Mexico. Really beautiful, lovely places, interesting people, and people live everywhere, right? They use technology everywhere. So, okay. What is this thing? User experience research. Here's a definition from the Interaction Design Foundation. What they say is that user experience research is a systematic study of target users and their requirements to add realistic context and insights to the design and development process. and that user researchers are meant to uncover problems and opportunities. I would say that kind of aligns with how I think about user experience research. I also define it for people in saying, it's my job to understand why things are happening, the context of why things are happening, how people are using or wanting to use a technology, and to bridge the gap between what they say and what they mean. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. And then either bring that information back to the team and sort of dump that into the process of how we're thinking about what kind of problems we want to solve, how to solve them. And a lot of times, if I can, I'm actually bringing teammates in field with me to be there while the research is happening. And today I'm going to talk about that sort of latter piece where I'm bringing XFN, what I call cross-functional teammates, XFN, into the field so they get their own exposure to this. And Steve Jobs, he's a controversial fellow for a variety of reasons, but he really got it when it came to like centering your products around users. And I like this quote where he says, if the user's having a problem, it's our problem. And that's how I, as a researcher, think of this. And I want to encourage any engineer, any other kind of XFN teammate, whether you're a product manager or a project manager, or you're a designer, that their problem is our problem. I've been on enough teams and heard enough times somebody say, well, they're just using that thing wrong. They're just not using it right. Well, when we uncover that in research, I think that actually is not so much an indication of, gosh, someone is using something wrong and that user needs to be trained correctly. Sometimes, but mostly it's an indication of there's a gap between how we intended the product to be used and how it's being used by our customers. And we want to understand that so we can resolve those kinds of issues. Okay. Hopefully I stay good on my time, y'all. Like, we'll see. I got a timer going here. I started it a couple minutes late, but hopefully I'll stay tight. Okay. So why is UX research a differentiator? Here we have Sherlock Holmes telling us that we need to do our research. The way I think about this is if we can understand users and their context, right? How they're using something, when they're using something, what's the environment like that they're using this thing, this product in. If we can really understand that better and build products to support whatever context or environment they're in, they're much more likely to try something, to use it, and to keep using it. And we can, as we do more research on a product and get better and fine tune it more, people are more inclined to keep using it, which is often, what we want. We usually don't want people to use something one time and then be done with it and be gone. Okay, so why is this a differentiator? Because within research, we are learning about their behaviors and their attitudes and the context and conditions of these things. And for me, from a researcher's perspective, what's really interesting is what they do, their behaviors, and then what they say, their attitudes. Sometimes there's a big gap between those. Like, how many times have you, not just in regular life, one of your friends will say, oh yeah, I go do this all the time. I work out all the time. But then you know them well enough to go like, dude, you work out one time a month. Like, what are you talking about? The way that people perceive themselves can be sometimes quite different. And so as a researcher, I'm looking at what do they say and how they feel about stuff, and what do they say about what they do, but then what are they actually doing? And I need to navigate that space between those things to make sense of that gap. We get to learn about context and conditions. So for example, if you are working on a product that requires a lot of focus, maybe there's highly complex tasks or activities that someone has to do in the product. But if we understand that the context is they're in a really noisy place where they're interrupted all of the time, maybe the temperature is uncomfortable, too hot, too cold, both. That helps us understand, gosh, we might need to take some slightly different approaches to how we design and build this product, right? let it save automatically, let people pause and come back to where they're, working on something within a workflow. These things can make actually a big difference, knowing these, and they'll improve the product if we do that. And really, part of what makes it really, this is always the kicker. It's honestly much cheaper to do research early than to build something, release it into production, and find out what's wrong with it then, and then have to go back and fix all of these problems. It can feel kind of, gosh, this is taking so long to get these things done. But I've actually run cost-benefit analysis on some of the projects I've been on to sort of prove out, like, if we take a month to do research, here's the, 4 months of eng time that we will be able to claw back because we figured out the problems and the right ways to solve them before we even start spending all of this time on writing any code. And I got to move around everything that I see. And then this last thing is, like, products don't exist in a vacuum, right? We often think when we're building things, oh, well, they use my banking app and there's nothing else on their phone, because we don't often think about, like, oh, maybe they're in an environment where, mobile phones are incredibly expensive and they actually swap SIM cards and share a mobile phone with 1 or 2 other people. Maybe they, they're trying out multiple apps that might be your competitors. It's good for us to kind of understand that those things are going on, and that's additional really robust context of use for us to, sort of pile into our design and development process. Oh gosh, I clicked the wrong thing, y'all. Hold on. Okay, what does a UX researcher do? Look, charts, circles, important things. When I went looking for, like, gosh, what are some good, more visual type diagrams of, like, what are the stuff that researchers do? I kept seeing circles, lots and lots of circles. I don't feel like as a researcher, I go in circles, but somebody thinks that we do. And all this is really here is to just kind of show you that there are sort of phases and processes that researchers go through for all this stuff. We don't just go out and wing it, or we surely should not. If someone is doing that, perhaps they were not trained properly as a researcher. But this helps me try to have the conversation with you around research can and should happen in different phases of the design development lifecycle. And the focus on what kind of outcomes we can expect from the research will change depending on where we're doing it in the lifecycle and what methods and approach that we take. So I've worked on projects where we're not even sure, like, what the product is yet. So incredibly early stage type of research where I'm maybe going to answer a really broad question. So when I was working at WhatsApp as the lead researcher there, I was tasked with answering the question, how do people communicate with businesses? Sounds like a pretty simple kind of question. Sure, okay, how do they do this? But then when you step back and you think, gosh, this question is not about how do people use WhatsApp to communicate with businesses. It's just how do they communicate with them? So gosh, we have to define what are all the modes of communication. So we defined 15 different modes of communication that we wanted to study. Product like WhatsApp has 2.5 billion monthly active users. We are in all 192 or 3 countries recognized by the UN. Probably a lot of you on this call have WhatsApp on your phone right now. Kind of lots of people use it. So if lots of people using it in lots of languages in lots of countries, there's probably going to be some marked differentiation around that. We want to understand from people all around the world, not just, 10 Americans in New York, how they use it. Like, that's going to be very different than how maybe, some young mother in rural India is using WhatsApp, right? It could be we want to understand that context. But let me talk a little bit about some of the methods that we use. So for me, I am what's called a qualitative researcher. The methods I mostly employ are qualitative in nature. I do some quantitative research, but I'm not what I would call a hardcore quant. I will partner with a data scientist, or I will partner with a quantitative researcher if we're doing massive surveys, things where we need to run a regression or an ANOVA type of survey. These are fancy words for complicated surveys that you can learn a lot from. The methods I'm mostly using, and I primarily, probably for the last 5 or 6 years, I've really focused on international research in emerging markets. So a lot of my work, I got to get on a plane and go someplace where I don't speak the language. I don't look like anybody who's from there. I don't understand the culture perhaps very well. I certainly didn't grow up there. And I want to talk to people. And talk to people in a variety of ways. Maybe I'll go to their home and I'll have a translator who's doing simultaneous translation so I can hear it in my ear and the participant can hear in their ear what I'm saying. We may have people join us at a facility, an office where we have them use a product that we have, maybe that we're developing, and have them do tasks on it. Maybe we visit them in their business to talk to them, but to also kind of watch and observe and be silent observers of what's going on, who's coming here, what kinds of things are happening, what kinds of problems pop up during the day. Maybe we're at an auto shop and, we're just sort of watching how many cars are coming in, what kind of things are they being fixed for, how does payment happen, what kind of tools are they, well, there's the mechanical tools they're using to fix the automobiles, but then also like what kind of like software tools are they using? And so I'm leading, a process where we're kind of going and being investigators. We are borrowing from other disciplines, social science disciplines like sociology and anthropology, and we're borrowing methods that they developed for field studies to understand subpopulations. And I'm using those to understand this subpopulation of people who are potential or current users of our products. Sometimes we even want to talk to people who used our product and then abandoned it, because we really want to know, like, why did you hate it? Was it not useful? Because that can tell us a lot about ways we might improve the product. But let me come back a little bit to methods here. So we can work early in the life cycle to just help define a problem space and understand information and understand opportunities for the team to build products or services for. So we could do very early. We can also do research on, hey, who are all the competitors in this space, and what do they do, and how do they do it? And, can we get a sense of what they're doing well and what they're not doing well? That can be really good, important information. We can work with, maybe some designers or some front-end engineers to develop prototypes that we then take to users and we test to try to validate or pressure test ideas that we have. So maybe we're not really spending a lot of eng time at this point in the process, but we're kind of trying to test ideas first before we think let's actually dedicate a lot of engineers important time to building this kind of product. And then as we go through and get closer to maybe to release, we want to test again to see is everything working as we think it should be? Are there any things that come up that don't make sense to users that we still do have time to fix before we go live? And then once we go live with something, over time, as your product matures, we want to revisit the users and how they're using the product, and have they had to develop workarounds because it doesn't quite do this one thing that they want it to do, so we can understand how they're using it and the context of how they're using it sort of in the real world. Okay, I should breathe a little bit. Whew. Okay, all right. Okay, so I had said earlier that I would talk a little bit more about actual methods. So these are the tools that I use in my toolkit. And this little handy graphic I like because I would say it's not perfect, but I think it's a really good demonstration of there's a lot of different methods, and this is not an exhaustive visual of all the methods that exist, but it's a pretty good one. And it shows us on an axis of attitudinal on the y-axis at the bottom to behavioral, right? So on a range of what people say versus what people do. And then on the x-axis from left to right, we have qualitative measurements, qualitative methodologies to quantitative measurements and methodologies. Some of these terms you might be familiar with if you work on teams where you might have a researcher, or you might have someone who can do usability testing. So you can see usability testing is almost all the way to the left in qualitative and up the y-axis past the midway point. And it's usually not a free form like, hey, just go use it and we're going to watch. We want people to do specific tasks, follow specific workflows, so we can find out, is this the right workflow, that it goes in the right order, that it makes sense to the users? Are we missing steps? Are we missing pieces of information that might be useful as they're trying to make decisions or accomplish tasks as they go through the workflow? So usability testing is really good for that. And that's probably the first method that a qualitative researcher is going to learn, where you are maybe sitting side by side, or maybe you're remote, you and one other person, and what we refer to as the stimuli, whether it's a flat designs that have just been created by a designer, or a working prototype, or a fully functioning system. And we have the user use it and tell us and talk out loud about what they think and what they see and what they notice. And then we have specific questions we want to ask to understand more about sort of what they're thinking and how it works or is not working well for them. I do, like I said, a lot of field studies and contextual inquiry. So the green circles that are below usability testing, so still very far on the left side of qualitative. And they're partway in between, like attitudinal and behavioral, what they do and what they say. I want to kind of know all of that stuff. Often I am supplementing the primary method that I'm using with secondary methods, because I want to know like the why. And qualitative research really answers why. Why is someone doing this? Why are they not doing that? Why did this happen? Why did that happen? Whereas quantitative measures can tell you also what happened, at what frequency, how many people were impacted. So I think of this as, when we talk about the term you hear a lot about is big data. From my perspective, quantitative data, right, is big data. Big data sets, lots of people, we can understand sort of what they're doing. Qualitative data is what I call thick data. So dense, sometimes ambiguous, a lot of meaty information around why something is happening. So for my research to be really robust and for me to really thoroughly answer questions that a team might have, I want to do both if I can, if I've got the time, if I've got the budget. And all these things come into play, but I'm trying to mix the methods that I'm using to get the most reliable and most the most reliable results for the team that I'm working with on this. And so when I think about, you've got big data and then you've got thick data, it's kind of like building a web that you've just got more and more information and context to understand what's happening, when it's happening, why it's happening, where it's happening, who it's happening to, because that can all feed into building a product that more people can use, or people who are using it have a better experience using it. So it's much more inclusive, right? When we actually take into account what's going on with all of these folks. Let me get something to drink and my water's right here. I'm not allowed to have my water on my desk because I knock it off. I talk with my hands a lot. And so I just go off camera that I've got another little table to the side of my desk because I had to put myself on restriction for this. So forgive me. Okay, let's keep going. So this is what I look like in the field, and not just like what my face looks like, but these are the kinds of things I'm doing in the field. So I am having conversations with people. at their homes or at their place of business or on the street, trying to understand, what do they think about stuff? What do they care about? And in just about every one of these, it is very difficult to see, but in just about every one of these photos, I'm actually working in translation. The interpreters are out of the line of sight, and I'm sitting with the participant face to face, like we're having a conversation, and kind of like magic, it's as though I can speak every language in the world. So whether that's Bahasa Indonesia or Hindi or Tagalog or Spanish, this is what I look like when I'm actually out in the field doing my work. And I will say, lower right-hand corner, you see the dog in my lap. A lot of times people will be told, put your dog and cat away while the researchers are here. We don't want you to bother them. I'm the researcher who walks in and the first thing I say is like, where's your dog? Where's your cat? And sometimes they come and join us in the interview. It's a lot of fun. Okay. All right. How are we doing on time? I think we're okay. So now I actually want to talk about some examples of projects I've done and walk you through it. So we had a product, we had developed an advertising product that what we call a click to WhatsApp ad. So if you're on Facebook and you've got your feed, right, and you're looking at it and you see these ads come up, these ad units come up, there might be a little call to action button that shows that you can start a WhatsApp conversation. This is the product that I'm talking about. I worked on the team that invented these and developed them. But you know, so we built them, we sort of put it out into the universe. This was probably 2018 or so, and wanted to understand better, like how are people using this? What's the context of use? All the things I've talked to you about that as a researcher, we want to know to kind of feed into the product. So well, we better get on a plane and go places where they use WhatsApp a lot and they use these ads a lot. So we were able to look in our data to see who are the biggest users of this. And we were focused on small advertisers, not big businesses, not Coca-Cola, not Nike, not ASOS, nothing like that. We were looking at small businesses. So the approach that we took, oops, I'm clicking on the wrong thing, is we wanted to do what I call discovery research in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and Mexico City, Mexico. So discovery research, what does that mean? That's not a word I've used so far in the presentation. Discovery means like we're kind of on a hunting exhibit. What's the right word? A hunting, we're hunting. There's a word I'm missing. And we want to just go discover and understand like what's really happening. We can see the data in our systems, but that's just quantitative data. It doesn't tell us why these things are happening or any of that stuff. So we just kind of wanted like really open, build base understanding of what, and hopefully find some things that we could help us understand how to improve the product. What methods did we use? So this thing called contextual inquiry. So that was on the previous slide that had, you know, the XY axis thing. What does that mean? Contextual inquiry. It means we go someplace where the thing is happening and we ask a lot of questions, right? So within the context of use, we are inquiring about how it's being used, when it's being used, not just the main use cases, but edge use cases, like when something goes wrong or there's a problem or you lose power or you've got too many people trying to use the thing. So we really want the sort of lived experience. These what I call semi-structured in-depth interviews, sounds like a mouthful. What it means is we have spent time before going in the field to figure out, hey, what questions do we really want to ask? What's really important to us? And there's processes that we go through to collect the questions and to prioritize them and triage them and figure out like what kind of things will we get from each question. And so we organize that in advance before we go, in the field. But then we also leave space for in the conversation. So it's not so structured and so regimented that like they can't tell us something they just want us to know. And so I find leaving that bit of space in the conversation can open us up to hearing about stuff we wouldn't normally hear about. And of course, I'm often doing that with simultaneous translation. I speak like 1.5 languages. And so for all the countries that I have gone and done research in, I need that kind of help because gosh, we'd be in a lot of trouble otherwise. And then this other method called observational study. Sounds really kind of cool. It means we go somewhere, shut up and watch and take notes on the atmosphere. Sometimes it's important to know what the temperature is, how many people are moving through the space, how loud is the space? Are there any smells that are going on that are distracting? What if you work in an office building that's right next to a meat processing plant? And the ventilating system in your building sucks in the smells from the processing plant. That's probably going to impact how you're going to be able to sit at your desk and concentrate, because maybe there's like a lot of processing happen on certain days of the week. And, so we want to find out all of those things that you would never find by just looking at maybe behavioral data in a system that says they clicked here, they clicked here, they clicked here. And I really like this quote by Peter Drucker. And he says, the most important thing about communication is to hear what isn't being said. And I would say a lot of my job is to not just hear what's being said, but to try to understand and discern what do people mean underneath that. And it is an art, and it is a science, and it is something that I continue to try to get better at and practice and work with my team when I bring them in the field, because maybe we ask somebody, hey, what do you think about this? How are you using it? And then, an answer that researchers get all the time that we know is maybe not truthful. It's like, oh, it's good. It's nice. Yeah. Like, what does that tell me? How do I tell a designer, okay, it's nice? What do they know to do from that? What would an engineer know to do if they just hear, well, it's nice, it's good? And so I'm trying to take into account and ask good follow-up questions based on all the things they've told me and what I'm observing to get at, well, okay, what's good about it? What could be better about it? Because a lot of times people don't want to say, I really hate this thing that you guys developed. You're paying me to tell you, and I don't want to be rude, but God, it's such a pain in the butt to have to do this one thing where I have to go through 14 steps when it should be 2 steps. Not everybody wants to willingly tell us that. And so it's my job as a researcher to dig and dig and dig to get at that, because that's what's going to be helpful for the team, right? That's how we build inclusive products that take into account, gosh, this person has to go through these 14 steps 37 times a day. Wow, that's such a repetitive process, and it's the same process. So how might we shorten that and make it easier so they can gain efficiencies in their work? They can gain efficiencies in how they use our system, because that can be material on the back end for the business and their profitability, right? So we want to think about these kinds of things. All right, let's see. Okay, so let's talk about impact on engineers. These are real live photos. I got permission from some of my teammates that I worked with before, of people I brought in the field with me, who are working on this Click to WhatsApp product. And what you see here are photos of us working while we're in the field, because we're taking notes and we're trying to understand patterns in what we're learning and what we're seeing and what's really sort of provoking us. And for them, it's really neat because they often have never been in the field before, or maybe they've been in the field with me, but one time before, but not lots. It's a huge privilege to be able to do this kind of stuff. So impact on engineers. So I went back as I was preparing for this and went and talked to some of these engineers who I'd worked with in the field. And one of them just, we had a really good conversation about this. He talked about how being in the field and meeting with real people who used the product he built, which he had never in his life before met people who used his product. He was the lead engineer on the Click to WhatsApp ads piece. When we were in Mexico City, we visited a school that did tutoring to help kids take entrance exams and young students to take college entrance exams that are really important in Mexico. And the gentleman who owned this tutoring school shared with us that he had to actually be pretty judicious of when he ran these ads because they were so successful that his staff couldn't handle all of the WhatsApp messages they were getting to try to give people information and get them signed up and matriculated into the program. So it actually, like, it was great for his business, but there was no real throttling of how many messages to send out and then how many contacts they got back. And so just kind of seeing that, like, this thing that we built has a material, in this instance, very, very net positive impact. For the engineer, he was amazed that, like, oh, wow, like this is what it's like in the wild. It was amazing. And one of the things he said that he told me, I wrote down, he said he was really struck by how this gentleman who owned this tutoring, very small business, how he told us that he was able to afford a better life. And that was sort of a really shocking realization for this engineer to see that. Another thing that they talked to me about was how important the relevance, how important localization is. One of them even said, like, this was the biggest eye opener for me because it was an engineer who had grown up in India. And what he'd said, and I'm checking my notes because I want to make sure I say this right. He said that he had not seen part of the world where there were non-English speakers who were heavy tech users. And he said that doesn't happen often in India. So his lived experience of growing up in India was that if you didn't speak English, you probably weren't a heavy tech user. That was, you know, what his experience was. And so subconsciously, not even thinking, he made the incorrect assumption that that would be the case all around the world. And when we were in Mexico and when we were in Sao Paulo, he was like, oh, wow, these are not people who are spending their lives working, in English all day long. They may speak English, but they speak another language and they're very heavy tech users. That sounds like a very simple thing, but it blew his mind. And it kind of made him think about, wow, when I'm building things, I really need to think about the fact that, like, people are using this in a bunch of different languages. Like, it hadn't really settled in until we're in the field and he sees that stuff. On the other side, one of the big realizations that came out is that, like, not everyone is super well versed in technology. And just because you build a system a certain way does not mean that people are going to use it that way, or they're going to fully understand all the features and functionality. And, like, that's okay. When we were in our office and we're removed, it's easier to blame and say, well, they just don't know how to use it. But then you go in the field and you see, and you're like, oh, people, yeah, I built something that actually is hard for them to use. Like, maybe I need to make some changes to the tool for that. I'm looking at time. We've got a few more minutes, so I'm going to go a little bit. We're pretty close, but I think we're going to go. And this I've already talked about, but I really try to impress upon the teammates I take into the field with me that there really is a difference between what people say and what they mean. And so if we do a survey, it's not going to tell us all the things because we can't follow up. And if we don't ask the question in the right way, we can't follow up. And so surveys are one great method, but there really can be weaknesses to them. And qualitative research is where we can get at understanding that gap between what they say and what they mean. Here's a quote from one of the engineers. He said, if I ever saw that any metrics had gone below a certain level in a specific locale, I wouldn't just look at it as numbers. Those numbers had faces. This is what he told me was the big impact after he had been in field with me. For the first time in his life, he met people who used his product, and he came up to me one night and was like a kid at like a birthday, at his birthday, who'd just gotten the greatest present, that, like, holy cow, there's a real human who uses this thing. It made a good, profound impression on him. I'm going to give us one quick other example, and then we're just about finished. So on the team, we were trying to understand, sorry, actually, I'm saying the wrong thing. Forgive me. Just very quickly, the impact on this is because we gathered all this information in the field, we learned some really important things. Small business owners needed to be untethered from a single cell phone. So Historically, WhatsApp is one phone number, one instance. You can't share a phone number across things. For, you could do it on the web. But what we started to see is that, like, if someone's running a business off of a WhatsApp phone number, they might need multiple phones. They might need to be able to run those conversations off of multiple computers with multiple employees and still have a threaded discussion with that potential customer. And we saw how critical that was and started to put that into our backlog of features to work on. We also learned that sometimes these things are like too successful, and it like opened up a floodgate to these small businesses where they got more business that they could handle. And that actually could also be a big problem. Sounds like, oh, it's great. But if there's too much demand and you can't satiate that demand, you can upset potential customers and then they'll never come back. So that's really critical to understand. And like I said, multiple people needed to be able to use the same account simultaneously. At the time, there was really no way to do that, but it was a huge problem. Let's see. Doing all of these things helped us build more inclusive products that had better functionality to better serve the needs of our constituencies around the world. Let's see, very quickly, and then I'll end and we can go to questions. We did a quick, not a quick project, actually. We were in Indonesia for a couple of weeks to understand trust signals. Advertisers wanted to be able to prove, hey, I'm a trustworthy business. And customers wanted to be able to say, hey, is this a trustworthy business? I'm looking for signs and signals that indicate this is a trustworthy business. So for 2 weeks, we went to Indonesia in 4 cities to visit with customers and with small business advertisers. We did what are called diary studies, which is before we even get in country, we have people recording all the kinds of things that they're doing, so we understand what they do daily in regards to the product or the activity. Again, we did these in-depth interviews, and again, we did these contextual inquiries. And what we did is we really learned that there were some very specific things that were common amongst small businesses that they wanted to be able to share. There were some very specific cultural things that were important in Indonesia, and actually even just within one city of the 4 cities that we went to, it was really important to be able to have a sense of humor in the ads that they were creating. I know that sounds a little strange, but the city in Indonesia called Bandung, it's like where a lot of the comedians in Indonesia come from. They're known for it. And so the whole town kind of takes humor pretty seriously. So advertisers wanted to be able to advertise with humor and have ways on the platform to do that a little bit more easily. So we gathered all this info to help increase trust signals, actual things we could put on the advertisements, links to a web page, links to an actual address, reliable ratings, things like that to help demonstrate a little bit more reliability on both ends of that. And here's some more pictures of us in the field, doing research, meeting customers, and doing analysis. I'm beyond the edge of my time by a couple of minutes. Forgive me. I think we've got time now for questions. So with that, Anmol, do you want me to come off of screen share? And we can just, I'll stop sharing now.
Yes, so we have been receiving some excellent questions in the Q&A. Been taking notes. I don't know if we'll be able to cover all of them, but okay. Let's start with the first from William here. So William Miller is asking, I have noticed that people just accept what they get and do not test what they get, which this involves research. What is your experience with user testing, but not so much, say, foundational research?
Yeah.
Feel innovation comes from foundational research. Independent research and users are often not interested enough, though, to do this kind of research, like the foundational work.
Do you mean, can I just ask for some clarification? When you say users are not interested in this kind of research, do you mean not interested in participating in foundational research, William, or did you mean something different? I just want to make sure I'm clear.
I'm not seeing anything.
I don't see anything yet. Okay. Well, I'll try to answer. When I started out, it was in 1999. I was in graduate school, and it was during the dot-com boom, heading towards the dot-com bust. And back then, research was not nearly as sophisticated as it is today. The first method that I learned was doing usability testing, which is more summative or tactical kind of research where you're testing a product and you're looking at what works and doesn't work kind of stuff, not the foundational stuff. That was our bread and butter. And I did that. I've done a ton of that in my life. What I like about it is you can learn, if you're a good researcher, you can certainly learn about how they're using the product and why and all that stuff. But you are not beholden to only ask questions about that, right? You can have a conversation with this live human being that's in front of you and ask them about like, hey, how do you do these other things? How do you how do you typically do this? How do you typically do that? That may not be directly related to the product, but you want to understand context of how this person thinks about technology or types of services or things like that. I don't know if that answers the question, William, because I think I'm falling short, but if you come in and you ask a follow-up, we'll try to get to all of that.
Awesome. So moving on to our next question, this one comes from Mahashiv. Mahashiv Karimi writes, how to factor in cultural differences when doing research for a multinational product?
Yeah, I love that question. That was a lot of my research. I think there's some really important critical things that are at play. One, the researcher has to kind of give up this idea that like they're going to fully understand every culture or subculture that they're studying, right? So there's no perfect to shoot for. There is better to shoot for. So some of the things that I do, I've been incredibly fortunate. I have lived in North America, born in North America. I've lived in South America. I've lived in Europe, and I've lived in Asia twice. I am very lucky as an American to have been exposed to live deep into very different cultures. When you do that, if you are from one culture and you live in another, you learn a lot about yourself, right? Like what you think is normal, and then you go live someplace else and you're like, what? They do that here this way? That's terrible. We would never do that. It's awful. And then like 6 months later, you're doing the thing that way. So you learn a lot about yourself, and this starts to uncover the biases that you have just as a human. It's totally normal. You're not in trouble for it. It's very, very natural. So the first thing I think a good researcher does is kind of try to understand that about themselves and know that they'll get a lot of stuff wrong. The other thing that I think is, two other things I think are super critical. Study the culture. You know, if it's as simple as like go on YouTube and watch videos from that place. Go on Wikipedia and learn about some of the history, political, social, economic, religious history of that country. You're not going to know everything. Like imagine, like take a country like India, like, right? Thousands of years of history, so many different cultures, so many different languages. It's a massive country. You are not going to learn all of the things, right? In a week or 5 weeks or however much prep time you have, but you should still do it. And also just try to learn what are some of the social norms. So when I go in that country, I don't embarrass myself or do things that are unintentionally rude. And if you've got people on your team who are from that country, they're a great resource. And I have done that, right? So we were going to Brazil. And a lot of people on the team had never been to Brazil. Well, we had an engineer who was from Brazil. And so he put together a presentation and like spent an afternoon talking to us and teaching us about Brazil and what were important things to do and know and stuff like that. So that's really important. And then the third thing is, you know, I'm often working in translation. So I'm working with a local interpreter, and I work with them a little bit differently than a lot of other researchers. I spend a lot of time with them in preparation. They get my discussion guide, usually at least a week or two in advance, probably 2 weeks in advance. They get to digest it for a week. We meet like a video call and we go through it and we talk about vocabulary and we talk about, you know, what are we really trying to get at? So they start to become a researcher by proxy. A lot of people use interpreters as like, just translate what I say. I don't do that. I actually invite the interpreter to have much more control of the session. And I give them permission to actually stop the interview to ask follow-up questions, because they're going to hear tone that I can't hear. They're going to hear language choice that I don't understand. That may give them a little bit of a clue that says, hey, maybe they're not understanding the question, or they're not really telling us, like, I think there's more here. And what we do is I in advance work with my interpreters to come up with rules where they will, say to me in English, Brooke, I want to ask a follow-up question. Here's the follow-up question and here's why. And we talk very quickly about it. And because they can hear me, I've got a microphone on and I can hear them in my ear. The participant can't hear that. And I say, okay, yeah, or hold on a second, can we ask this or whatever? And then the interpreter will have a short conversation with the participant to clarify whatever that thing is. And then come back and then we'll sort of re-engage in the conversation and we might ask more follow-up questions. After we do each, like in-home interview or in-business interview, we do a debrief, and the interpreter is a team member at that point, right? They have really valid information they can share about what they learned during the session, but often they're a local, right? Who's lived there for 35 or 45 or 55 years. And so they have deep, deep knowledge and can explain to us, here's what they meant when they referred to that thing. We didn't have time to stop and talk about that during the interview, but here's some context. I remember being in Italy doing some research. I don't speak Italian. And our interpreter, after one of our interviews, and we were doing a debrief, kind of gave us a brief history about the reunification of Italy in the 1850s and how there are tax implications to this day because of it. Stuff I never would have known if I didn't open the door and actually encourage that kind of behavior for the interpreter. So those are the kinds of things I'm trying to do to account for the differences in the lack of knowledge that I have, but to be honest, I'm totally going to make mistakes. And so I'm trying to just go into it with awareness and get better every time, and ask better questions then of people. So those are some of the things that I do.
That's awesome. Thanks for that, Brooke. So the next question from Ken is on the same lines. I'm going to go to Chuck's question, and this one, I personally deeply resonate with this one. He says, I work with many users from all over the world. English is their second or third language, and they are navigating the US culture. And I'm very disappointed for the lack of appreciation amongst our developers for not being sensitive to how important seeking feedback is. Our users' problems are our problems. What tools, processes do you recommend to get almost force developers to stop, listen, appreciate the users?
Oh, I love that question. And it can be really hard, right? I don't ever think you can force people to care, but you can certainly cultivate an environment where you have, you give them opportunity to care. So not everyone is as fortunate as I've been, where I can get people on a plane. And it was, it's a huge privilege. And in deciding who would go on our field studies, it was looked at as, this is a reward. So engineers on our teams were really excited to be able to go in field, but not everyone can do that. It's incredibly expensive. A lot of companies can. I took 14 people to Indonesia for 2 weeks. It's kind of I've worked at a scale that's a little bit ridiculous. I love to use video. I've been using video a lot more the last probably 4 years or so. And so if I can't bring people in field with me, if I can get video of somebody doing something, and I did this in the Philippines on a project. I was working on a project and we were trying to understand how people were using some stuff. And oh, by the way, there was a problem we had. We saw this really precipitous drop-off in a workflow that we did not understand. And the data scientist and I had spent time, and she's like, if you could find out what this is, that'd be great. I figured it out. I saw it happening and I got video of it. And I got video of a lot of people doing it. And so then I worked with my editors and we edited a video, where they show different people doing the same thing over and over and over again to make a point. We edited the video that way to just show failure after failure after failure after failure. And it was not my team actually that was responsible for the infrastructure that was causing a problem. It was actually the billing infrastructure that was a problem. So I kind of had to go around the company to figure out who are the engineers who own this and what can I do? So I finally got in front of them and I love telling this quote because it's one of the funniest quotes I've ever heard. I found the engineering manager who was in charge of this, and I got my video in front of him and like so that he could see it. And you know, he didn't report to me. I'd had no control over, like, I couldn't boss him around or anything like that. He was a really nice guy, and he looked at me and he was like, Brooke. And the problem I had found was like a $10 million a month problem. Sounds like a lot in the Facebook world. It's not. And he looked at me in the face, and as we were having a conversation, he's like, Brooke, I don't deal with $1 million problems. I deal with $1 billion problems. It was the funniest thing I'd ever heard. He was actually not trying to be a jerk. Like, that was his lived reality. But then he went on to say, but this video drives me insane. I can't handle seeing this happening. I'm going to reprioritize some of our work, and we're actually going to fix this because like I can't handle seeing this. And so for me, it was really helpful to have this video to show the pain and to show the frustration. So as I've been going through and trying to hone my storytelling ability, I'm looking at ways to tell stories that do cause people to act. So I find video to be an incredibly productive way. If you don't have that, can you record audio so you can hear the tone of someone talking about like how irritating this is, or how dumb they think it is, or how mad it makes them, or going on and on about the problems it causes them. If you can't get that, can you get quotes that you can actually write out and attribute them to people and show multiple people saying the same thing? Sort of building your storytelling, I think I have found over the years that the better I can tell a story in that way that sort of evokes an emotional response, the more likely people are to act on things.
That's awesome. Also, Mashid in the chat, they're writing, great response. Thanks again, Brooke, for this excellent presentation.
Thank you.
We have another question come in, and I'm going to take this one before the rest. How do you sell the importance of the expense of this visit to higher management?
Yeah. So I've literally done cost-benefit analyses. It's really helpful if something has just gone bad in production, and it's because the team made a mistake. I'm not trying to dunk on people, but like, so this team that I've actually been talking about, I was based in London and doing this click to WhatsApp ad stuff. They decided that they were going to build an experiment and put it into production because there was this new ad format they wanted to test. They did not engage with me on any of this. They decided how they were going to build the product. They built the experiment. It was like 3 months of eng work. So that's a lot of time for an engineer who's got a bonus that they're looking to get paid out. Like, they want to be able to show that this was productive. So they put this into production. They run the experiment for a couple of months. It's a complete failure. And so on that, I was like, hey guys, can I do a post-mortem? Like, because I wanted to show the efficacy of like why we should do more research up front. And so I actually ran a study to find out what was the problem. I actually identified the problem, and it made a real big impression with the team and up the chain of like, oh God, she could have found this out before we did all this. So like, if you have that kind of moment, you can try to capitalize on them. I will do a cost benefit analysis of like, okay, if you release the product, like say it takes 3 months of eng time, 10 engineers, let's extrapolate what that cost is for us. If we just do that and we build a product and we don't get the usage that we expect, we don't sell as many units, we don't, whatever the measurement kind of is, what is the cost to go back, rip it open, and re-engineer to do it in the right way? Like, engineering time is incredibly valuable. So what I try to demonstrate is that one researcher can actually do a bunch of research that can feed a bunch of engineers' work. And what the research does, if we do the research right, it gives us a higher probability that we are getting the product, the features, the services right. So it will be more useful and we don't have to actually go back and re-engineer things. That's how I'm trying to have the conversation. Anywhere I can put numbers around, okay, here's the cost of, 3 people to be in field for a week. Here's the cost for that. Here's the cost of doing the engineering and then redoing the engineering if we get things wrong. And oh, by the way, we probably are going to get things wrong because how could we know the right way to do stuff because we haven't done any research? So that's a really rudimentary way of, a quick way of me describing it, but I'm trying to have those kinds of conversations. And if you can, find examples of like either other people in your company, if something's gone wrong and they had to re-engineer something, go find those numbers. How much time did it take? What was the impact to business? What was the impact actually to, reputation on those kinds of things? So you can measure negative impact also in non-monetary ways. Like, this gave the competitors 6 more months in market ahead of us because we had to go fix something. You can think about it and stuff like that in ways like that too.
That's awesome. Also, Chuck writes, excellent answer, record videos of users' frustration. That's a great idea. So he has been really enjoying your answers. He says, thank you. Going back to our list of questions, this one comes from Amrut. Amrut Dagde writes, what is the best research methods for generating or distilling personas? Any ideas for implementing this kind of research?
Okay, so you're welcome to the ambiguity of research. You will probably hate this response because the answer is, it depends. We pick methods based on a few different things. So I think about certainly fit for purpose, which is what you're asking about, but there are other considerations. How much time do we have, right? We don't live in a world where like, I could take all the time I want. How much time do we have? How hard is the population we're trying to study? How hard is it to get to them? Are they really difficult to recruit? Are they like very technical people and like they don't have time to do research? So it takes longer to recruit them. A question I'm often asking, or I try to always ask at the beginning of a research project is, hey team, what are you going to do with these findings when I'm done with them? What decisions is it going to help you make? So when it comes to something like personas are often a heavy lift. They're a lot of work to get done. And so if the team is like, well, we're just going to look at it and we don't know what decisions it's going to help us make. Like I'm looking at, well, are there other ways that I can bring information about who our customers are to bear that don't take as long, don't cost as much money, don't require as much effort? Because to do personas, there are a variety of methods you can do and multiple methods at that. So if you want to understand who these people are, what they do, how they do stuff, you can do things like surveys. You can do very complicated surveys. If you want to understand why they're doing that stuff, their motivations, things like that, you need to use qualitative methods. And so those are often, maybe you're going to go do in-depth interviews in person. Maybe you're going to do group discussions or focus groups. Maybe you're going to do unmoderated remote sessions. Like, what does that mean? I've never even said that before, where you have like a script in advance. You can't ask any follow-ups, but then they record themselves giving answers. You might do contextual inquiries. You might, so there would be different methods based on how much time we have, the recruiting, and what we're going to do with the responses at the end. But it should be a marriage of qualitative and quantitative methods to get really robust personas. Full disclosure, not a huge fan of personas because I know firsthand how much effort they take. They often have to be redone every 2 or 3 years. And a lot of times the team will read it once, put it in a drawer, and then they don't look at it again. So I'm often weary of doing things like personas.
Thanks for that, Brooke. Our next question is from Kelly. She asks, what is the difference between a behavioral and attitudinal research?
Oh, sure. So behavioral is literally what people do. What behaviors do they have? So the behavior could be, I walk to work every day, right? It's a thing that I do. An attitude is, how do I feel about walking to work every day? Am I pissed off because it's really hot out or it rains and I don't have a car because I can't afford it? Or is my attitude, it's such a wonderful way to start my day. I get moments to myself. I can stop and get a coffee on my way, my favorite donut. How do I feel about walking to work? Does my body feel good? Am I in a good enough health that it's something that I look forward to every day and gives me calm and peace of mind? So that would be a difference between behavior, what they do, and an attitude, how they feel about it. Like here's another example. So I brush my teeth every night before I go to bed. Some nights I have an attitude of like, great, gonna get in there, gonna floss, gonna do all the good things. I'm really like happy to clean it. Other nights I'm really tired. I've had a long day. Maybe I'm a little bit cranky and oh, I'm bothered that I have to go brush my teeth. I know I have to, so I'm gonna do it, the behavior. But my attitude may be, I'm grumpy about it. I don't really like it today. It feels like it takes too long. What do I need to clean these stupid teeth? So I hope that kind of makes a little bit of sense about the differences between attitudinal and behavioral.
Awesome. The next one is from Ketan. A really interesting question here. How to account for UX research done with internal users who represent the end users if we can't or are not allowed to test with the actual end users? Should we discount the results or just ignore it? Yeah.
I don't think you have to ignore it, but yeah, you kind of do have to discount it because like, gold standard is you want to like do research with actual users, but we know that like the reality of life is that that can't always be the case. Sometimes it can be like they're so hard to find. You can't find them. There's 7 people in the world who do this. Where are they? It could also be, there could be restrictions because of security clearances. It could be, a variety of things. When I'm doing research like that, it's a lot of caveats, right? Like, hey, we understand that we're not going to get the full breadth of understanding from this. And it's like when you create your hypotheses, also sort of detailing out and documenting, here are the limitations of this, and sort of explaining that. This probably sounds like a terrible answer because there is no single perfect thing, but I'm also then trying to look at, are there other ways I can triangulate? So if I need this kind of user, but I can't get them, so I have to do this sort of representative user. Are there multiple groups of representative users that I can do research with that when I combine the results of those are more close to the actual user that I want? So it's not a 1-to-1, it may be a 1-to-3 kind of thing. So I'm trying to get more differentiation from the user base. I try to look for things like that. And then if I can't do one method to get to this sort of set of users, are there other methods that might be available to me? If I can't have one-on-one conversations with them that are live, could I find enough people to do a survey? And can I supplement that way? I'm looking around like, how can I be sort of scrappy and have tenacity around trying to get closer and closer to a more representative user? But it's hard. It's not ideal. But I mean, I've had to do it too. It's just, you do the best you can.
That's great. So our last question for this afternoon, evening, again from Chuck, really interesting note. One problem to overcome for not sufficiently addressing the user experience is what seems to be the human nature of development. It's often considered to be a mundane requirement versus the actual intellectually stimulating cutting edge technology work. And to do it well, it takes a lot of time. In contrast, developers, engineers are often such because they're not particularly people-oriented, inherently working off in their small corner. How do we bridge this gap between these two types of groups, stakeholder groups?
Okay, that's a too much question. I think I'm going to probably need to do that again, but let me make sure I understand. So are we trying to, what are the two groups we're trying to differentiate between? I don't think I quite understand, because I think we were talking, that's a lot of preamble, if we could maybe start halfway.
Chuck, yes, so I think the gist of it is he's mentioning that a lot of developers, they find the actual development work, so writing code, intellectually stimulating.
Yeah.
But the task of conducting user research seems mundane to a lot of business users and like even developers. So how do you sort of bridge this gap between, say, design and UX teams and the developers?
One, I would fundamentally disagree with the premise. I have not had I don't often have a lot of engineers who say, I don't care about the people who use my products. I just want to build something and I don't care if they don't like it. Every engineer that I can think of who I've worked with, who's an engineer who's worth a darn, is like, they don't want to build things that people hate. Maybe there's some masochists out there, I don't know, but the engineers I've worked with over the last 24 years want to build products that people actually like using. And so I don't find it a big lift to try to convince people. Now, it can be incredibly hard if we are maybe doing usability testing on something that they built, and it can be very hard for them to sit through and hear all the criticism of it, because that can be kind of shattering. Something like people like, oh God, they really hate this, and so I will work with them to help them, kind of understand, like, what are we trying to do and what's the process. The times where I have had pushback from engineers is not so much about the research and them not being interested in it. Because anytime, like, I can show them, hey, here's somebody using something that you built, that tends to spark interest. And really interesting kinds of conversations. Gosh, I lost my train of thought. Like early in my career, I did pretty much get into a fight with an engineering manager because he did not, I had done some research and we had this pretty complex system where you'd have to like look up a bunch of stuff, and he did not want to have a search box. He did not want to have search on the tool. He wanted to have a dropdown. Well, just FYI, the dropdown would have probably had 30,000 line items in it. So it kind of would break the usability of a dropdown because people would be looking up POs and purchase orders and invoices and things like that. So we got into a pretty big fight about, like, why we needed to do this. And what I realized it came down to is it was going to be hard for him to do that. And so that happened very early in my career. It kind of helped me understand, like, God, what engineers do is really hard. I love working with engineers. And so I do try to come with it, with that attitude and enthusiasm. But I'm sorry, I actually fundamentally disagree with the premise that, like, engineers don't want to learn this stuff. I've had quite the opposite experience.
Awesome. So I think we'll have to end the Q&A section at this point in interest of time, but thanks again, Brooke. I personally found this so insightful. In fact, the comment section, I can see so many people talking about how they learned so much from this particular talk and your responses. We really appreciate you taking out time to help us learn more about these processes and methods.
Thank you for letting me be a part of this. Thank you for everyone who stuck around and asked questions and wanted to learn a little bit. Would love to connect with you on LinkedIn. I'm Brooke Baldwin, pretty easy to find. And anybody who has an interest about research, like, I'm just really proud of you and I appreciate it because, it can be a little bit hard to, like, step out of, like, maybe if you have a different role that you work in. So thank you. And thank you for inviting me on, Mal. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much. And for everyone, so I know that there were a lot of questions about if there will be a recording, when will this recording be shared? So Rosalinda, our program manager, has mentioned that the recording will be available by Friday. So you can, stay posted, keep yourself posted by signing up using that IEEE link and the LinkedIn post. A quick little, again, plug for those of you who are interested in, say, joining our group. So you can reach me at using this email address on mol.anubai@gmail.com. Drop me like a little blurb on, why you're interested in joining our group. If you found this content interesting, insightful, we want to sort of, host a lot more webinar sessions. We want to keep this discussion going. And like I mentioned in the beginning, we also want to come up with a proposal for standards that the IEEE committee, IEEE groups, development focus groups can leverage. So definitely reach out if you're interested. We're actively recruiting members and it would be great to work with all of you. Thanks again for taking out your time.
Bye-bye.